Hello once again, and welcome to the Common Sense Gospel. I am Danny Simmons.
And I'm Kurt Norbert.
Our title today is Forest Fire from Hell. This statement actually comes from, not literally, but the idea of this statement comes from James chapter 3. James, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, gives to us 12 verses that deal specifically with the tongue and the use of the tongue. And so James 3, verses 5 and 6 is where the title comes from. He says in verses 5 and 6, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. The tongue sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. It is such a dangerous weapon. And yet, one other part about the tongue that I think has to be said, even as we begin, is it's a useful tool. I can think about so many passages in the New Testament where we're told, instructed to use our tongue to do good things, to glorify God, to sing praises. There's a lot that we do, and it's an important topic because we all have one. I'm pretty sure everyone who ever hears this episode has a tongue in their mouth right now. And so I was just thinking, Kurt, how many ways do we use our tongue?
Well,
what does it do?
You mentioned singing. You preach almost every week. A lot of us teach scriptures. We talk with folks to encourage them or even rebuke them if need be. Chatting on the phone. I mean, you use your tongue every day at work, at play. I'm sure when you're in playing basketball, you're doing your typical trash talking.
Yes.
Because that's really about all you can do anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to get in their head.
Yeah.
So I do it with my tongue.
Hey.
But that's actually a very good point. I was thinking the tongue is such a phenomenal tool. We think speaking, singing, that's the ones you mentioned, teaching. But what about when you're going to test and see if something's hot that you're about to eat or drink?
Oh, yeah.
The tongue is the thermometer to tell the body, we can't take that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Also taste, the tongue is such an amazing instrument with the taste buds that we sample the things that we will or won't eat with our tongue. That's very important. We whistle. You can't whistle without your tongue. How about if a fly flies into your mouth? The tongue's getting that thing out of there, right? We go.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've not ever had to experience that.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Nothing's ever fallen in your mouth that you did not want in there?
Nope. Not that I can recall. I've learned to keep my mouth shut.
Oh, boy.
Which is kind of what James is talking about here. If you don't have something good to say, don't say it.
I can appreciate that good transition, but think about the different ways the tongue is used. Like, how about this? Some people can eat a meal and talk the whole time.
Yeah, that is amazing.
We prefer they not, but
multitasking there.
Chewing on food and talking, the tongue does it all. The tongue pushes that food up into the pouch of the cheek, so that you can get room to talk. We can eat and drink at the same time.
Yeah.
We all do that. But think about the role the tongue plays to get all that done so we don't kill ourselves. It's amazing.
Yeah, and as James says, it's a little member.
Yeah.
And relatively speaking, our tongue is a tiny part of the body.
Yes.
But it is immensely important.
Yes.
And the point that James makes is that even though it is so small, it is immensely dangerous. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's probably the most powerful member we have in our body because you can destroy somebody with it.
Yes, that's right. It can be
with just a word
turned into a sharp sword in a matter of seconds. And that's kind of the danger that we'll look at and talk about. One other thing that I had on my list about the tongue is that there's no bones in it. It probably is the strongest muscle, one of the strongest muscles in the body, and no bones. So you can't break your tongue. You would think that there'd be a few people, kind of be nice if they broke their tongue every once in a while, put a cast around that bad boy and, let them sit quietly. Some people need it, seriously. Some people just talk too much.
I hear you, yeah. Well, and that goes to what James is talking about here. The whole theme here is self-control. And what James says is the hardest area to exercise self-control is that little thing that sits in your mouth.
Exactly. So let's watch James flesh this out for us. In James chapter 3 and verse 1, it begins by saying, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." This is This is just one of those passages, that's one of the scariest ones for me. It's appropriately placed in my heart, but I think when I was considering taking on the work, that this verse was, I couldn't sleep at night. I wanted to step into the work. I felt I was being called by brothers and sisters to continue, like, you should grow in this, you should keep trying. But this verse is still right there.
Well, if it doesn't bother you, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
In my time, I've done some preaching, and I do a lot of teaching, always have, really. And it's just a constant reminder, you better be careful what you're teaching. And I've tried to improve on that, because a lot of times something would come to my mind, and I would speak it, and that can be dangerous. It's real easy when you do that to say something out of turn. So, again, it's self-control. And James uses some really picturesque illustrations to emphasize the control of the tongue.
Yeah, he really does. And so we have this point here. Do not stand up and teach if you can't do it yourself, or if you're not willing to do it. You better examine your heart, because there's a stricter judgment, because you're going to potentially, as a teacher in Scripture, you're going to tell people the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But that standard has to be applied to you first, or you're not the one who should be saying it. And so again, that is horrifying, because we're talking about God. We're not talking about math class. We're talking about the Word of God and what He wants His people to hear. So it just, it really does settle things down.
And it's easy to get prideful and to start, your speech will betray that I'm teaching now. People are listening to me. Well, yes, they are. And
Yeah.
So you better slow down.
That's right.
And make sure, as you said, the proper attitudes behind this, because you're going to have some tremendous influence on somebody's spirit.
Yeah.
Their eternal soul might stand or fall because of not only what you're saying, but the way you're saying it.
Yeah, that's right. So this is good. As we start looking at this, it directly applies to what you and I have tried to do as Christians, and what we hope to continue to do, but we've got to be careful. Verse 2, and he says, "For, this is why, we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body." Do you have anything on what it means to be a perfect man?
Not particularly a verse, although the Bible, especially the New Testament, talks a lot about that. One thing I do like to point out is generally when the New Testament uses the word perfect like this, it doesn't use it the way we do today.
Right.
We use perfect as, there's no flaw there. Everything is absolutely just right. Where the word here means to complete or mature.
Mature, yeah.
And so that fits the picture. If someone is complete, they are a mature person, they're more able to control even the tongue, which James here says is the toughest part of the body to really keep consistent control of.
Yeah. If you don't stumble in words, you are able to bridle your whole body. This tells us the strength and the power of the tongue, that, as you talked about, this little bitty member inside of our mouth, if we can control that, then the rest is going to be okay. That's amazing to me, because we have bigger body parts, the hands, the legs, all of that. If you can get the tongue worked out, the rest of this will be just fine, because it proves maturity to be able to bite your tongue, to hold your tongue, to not say things when you shouldn't. And when you do use it, to use it with wisdom. The proverb says that she speaks with wisdom to those who hear her, and that takes effort and thought, for sure.
And Jesus said in Matthew 12 that it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. So really, if you can control your tongue, you're controlling your mind, because your tongue expresses what's in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's out of what you think and the way you are. It's an expression of your character. What you say and how you say it to people is going to tell them who you are. So if you have control of your tongue, then you have control of your thoughts and your mind too. And that is self-discipline. That's the self-discipline that Peter talks about and that the scriptures repeatedly emphasize that we need to practice.
Absolutely. And if we strive to do this, the beautiful thing is we become a gift to everyone we meet and come across and associate with, because we are trying to be thoughtful, and we do hold our tongue when we could have just let it go and really tore someone down. We don't do that. There's no benefit. We're not serving ourselves. We're trying to honor God. And so, as you said, there's a picture, a reflection of us that is given to the world. It's that you are painting that is completed one stroke at a time from day to day. And as you learn to bridle your tongue, that painting becomes something brilliant and beautiful and pleasant. And so just to say, that's just the way I talk, or, people like that, there's a bigger point they're missing, which is you look like something to everyone around you. That's just the way you talk. Fine. You're saying we got to put up with this. We got to stomach everything you're going to say. There's something else, though, that affects you, whether people are willing to share that with you or not. You're starting to look like something to the people around you. And they may be saying to themselves, I'm going to avoid this guy like the plague. Or he seems to be a good, friendly person. I enjoy your company, those kind of things. That's worked out moment by moment. So it's not just this is who I am or the way I talk. God is saying, work this out. Be better about this. And so the encouragement is certainly there for us. In James, as he lays this out, he transitions now to practical. And this is what I love so much about James and in the way that he writes, is he says, well, look over here, check this out. Doesn't this work this way? So for me to think, well, I'm pretty good with my tongue. He says in verse 3, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. There's that whole thing you were talking about words are the expression of what's happening in the mind.
Yep. And these are, as you said, practical applications, because everyone can relate to this. We've all seen horses. We know how powerful they are. They're big and strong. And yet, to control one, you just put a bit in their mouth. And you pull the rein this way, you pull it that way. You can loop it over their head and lead them, and they'll just docilely follow you. Ship and a rudder, I'm familiar with that, having been in the Navy. You've got huge ships and a relatively small rudder. The individual decides which way it's going to go, and he's able to steer that huge ship exactly where it wants to go. And that's what the tongue should be like. It's a relatively small member, but it's powerful. And you have to move it in the right direction.
Yep.
And use that power wisely and
That's
correctly.
Right. And both analogies are so good, because one of them is another physical body with a mind of its own, in the horse. And like you said, that little bit that goes in the mouth now allows us, the rider, the opportunity and the ability to control where that animal will go. And with the ship, he mentions very clearly, large ships are driven by fierce winds. They are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. So we think about the fierce winds of society, morality, that being under attack, someone's provoking you and trying to get you to go a certain way. Think about the ship. The winds are pushing that ship, and yet the pilot is not worried. He realizes the winds, he recognizes, he compensates for that, but he can still get that boat where he wants it to go. And that's the point. In the greatest of storms, assuming the ship is built well enough to withstand the storm, the pilot still controls it. Mm-hmm. And so do we. We control our tongue. No matter how much pressure or how fierce the wind is, and it can be, and it will be, we still decide where this ship goes. I love that picture.
And I like the picture, too, the one you used to start the show. The tongue is a fire in verse 6, a world of iniquity. And that's sometimes we don't get that picture, but just think how easily our emotions can be ignited by a word.
Oh, yeah.
You hear someone say something, you watch another person hearing that just blow up. Well, that fire just got set. That little tiny fire just erupted. It just burned up the whole forest. I can remember having grown up in California. Every summer we get wildfires out there. And oftentimes they'll come back and say, we found out how it started. It burned up 100,000 acres and destroyed a bunch of homes. Someone tossed a cigarette out to the side of the road. Or it was a piece of broken glass that the sun shone through, and it got hot enough or acted like a magnifying glass, and it lit that little patch of grass on fire. And then it just spread. This little tiny spark, this little tiny member. The tongue's it's a little teeny campfire that gets out of control very easily. And as a result, the whole forest can burn down.
Yeah, that's verse 5. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. It is the tongue. So we'll read 5 and 6 together and get that in its context. It says, even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. This language is so strong towards us, towards believers and those who are trying to serve the Lord, about the power of the tongue, the nature, and where that comes from. Like you said, some trigger word comes up, somebody just says, that's it, I'm going to explode. What comes out next, if it's anger, and if you're just furious anger, what comes out, what bubbles up out from that is from hell.
Mm. Yeah, it's certainly not godly wisdom.
No.
Like James says, this is not the wisdom from above. It's earthly and it's sensual and destructive. Proverbs 12:18 touches on this too, where Solomon said that the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of a wise brings healing. So even if something is said, if you handle it right, you could put that fire out.
Yes.
But you keep it up, if you're reckless with what you're saying, that'll pierce like a sword. It'll start that fire, and then it just rages out of control. When someone loses their temper and just starts blowing it, it's hard to calm them back down.
Yeah.
They don't want to listen to you anymore. In fact, a strong emotion like that blocks your ability to hear. They're not hearing what you say anymore. You have started a forest fire, and a lot of times all you can do with that forest is get out of there.
Yeah. Evacuate.
Yep.
It's so true. And James chapter 1 says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So we've got to find a way to put this out. This fire is still there, but I can control it. You mentioned such a great word. I can't control that forest fire once it starts to burn. When do I have control? When it's still within me. Mm-hmm. If I have something that I'm going to say about someone or to someone that I know is going to tear them up, the very best thing I can do is hold it inside and take it to the Lord. I think that settles everything.
Yes.
If I go to the Lord and say, Lord, I'm about to say this to this person, and he says, shame on you. My child would never say, if I can't get permission from God to say it, then there's my answer.
Well, and it's because, and that's where that self-control comes in. Sometimes it's so hard to step on the brakes in that moment and just say, I'm not going to say that. Because once you do, you can't unsay it.
Exactly.
We talk about that a lot. You can't take back what was said. You might go, oh, I didn't mean it. Well, but you said it, and now it's out there. It's just like pushing send on a text or whatever. Now it's out there. You cannot get it off out of the ether. So don't put it out there if it's not going to build someone up. Like Paul taught in Ephesians, let your speech be seasoned with salt. Let there be grace in your words.
Yes.
Those words should build up. They should encourage. They should comfort. They should lovingly rebuke if that's what's needed. But in all cases, those words are for the person's betterment. If you can't say this is for your good, then don't say it. Keep it in there.
Yep.
Because if it comes out wrong, you may do damage that you can't repair.
That's right. And I think just that rule, as I've used it in my own life, has been so helpful to me to say, if I say this out loud, then the devil's got a hold of it, and he'll get as much mileage as he can.
Oh, yeah.
He'll use that to tear down and destroy as long as it's possible. But if I keep it to myself, then it's between me and the Lord, and I can still work that out and save all that trouble. And like you said, this is not where you just go, oh, okay, then I'll do that. It is so hard when someone's in your face and challenging you and pushing your buttons that we all have a tipping point. Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when my grandmother used to say to me, I'm about at the end of my rope. And I'm like, what rope are we talking about?
Yeah.
It's a rope I can't see apparently, but we're about the end of it. And when we get to the end of it, it's going to be lights out for Danny. And so everyone has that, don't they?
Yeah, you have a limitation. And this is what James is getting at. Sometimes you just have to get out of there. You know, there's nothing that can be fruitful about this conversation or, you know, this discussion. I need to leave.
Yeah.
Rather than be dragged into it and start saying things that you're going to regret, that cannot be undone. And you're setting the world on fire, as James is pointing out here. There's so much that can be done with the misuse of the tongue. And it takes almost steely self-discipline to control those moments.
Yeah.
You almost have to think it through beforehand that if I get in this situation, how am I going to respond? I cannot start answering it word for word. Oh, you said a bad thing about me. Here we go. I got a few stored up on you.
That's awful.
No, that's not helping. That's shouldn't be the way that you want people to see you.
No.
So really, as James points out there in verse 6 that we read, the tongue defiles the whole body. That's a weighty statement. You are defiling the entire body with your tongue because you're setting the tone for you're expressing your character and your lack of self-control. So, and as a Christian who should know the way we're supposed to speak, if we lose control of our tongue, we're then being hypocrites. We're supposed to act like this, but I'm not. I'm letting you have it and you deserve it. And I'm going to, I'm turning it up to 11 for you. That is not the response that a Christian should have. We don't see that with Jesus. We shouldn't have those contradictions as James goes on and later illustrates for us.
Yeah.
There should be purity and consistency and grace, as we mentioned. Our speech needs to be gracious, helpful to others.
Yeah, and you think about the tongue set among our members that, it defiles, as you said, defiles the whole body. I can work at my work in the office all day long and do a wonderful job. So, my body, my mind, my hands, everything's working for this good end. I've accomplished several things. I'm doing good work for the company. And then at the end of the day, I go in to give the boss a piece of my mind with my tongue. And you countered everything you tried to do that day to be a good employee. You're destroying yourself by the use of that tongue. And that's what I was saying when someone's like, well, that's just the way I talk. No, the Bible's saying to us, there's a lot more to it than that. And your character's on the line. You're destroying yourself. You can work night and day and do such a great job, but your mouth can make you to be someone that no one wants to be around. Like, no, it's better to let you go. Yeah, you do good work, but man, you're hard to deal with because you're constantly bad-mouthing your boss, your coworkers. What about a young woman who has spent an hour or two, getting herself ready to go out for a nice dinner? She's done all that she knows to do to be as beautiful as she can, and she certainly is. And so she steps into the room. She lights up the room with her beauty, with her presence, and everyone's like, wow, who is that? And then she opens her mouth, and it's full of filth.
Yeah.
What has she just done to all the presentations she worked on?
Yep.
She defiled her whole body.
Nobody's thinking of that anymore.
No, her beauty just disappears because she cusses like a sailor or whatever her issue may be. You can sense and feel the poison coming out, and it's very real. And someone says, well, the tongue, it's really, you guys are making kind of too big of a deal of it. I would say, oh yeah, let me give you a name, Adolf Hitler. You watch videos of him in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s, at a pulpit, pounding that pulpit, and people glued to watching every step he makes and every word he says. He convinced a nation to utterly destroy another people. And they were all on board with it. And how did he do it? With his tongue.
Yes. Yep. His oratory was what swayed the nation. And in fact, you go back on that theme to ancient Greece, oratory was considered one of the highest and noblest practices. People liked to hear how well you could present an argument with eloquence and expression and all this other, it was the use of the tongue. So, and you mentioned, well, that's just the way I talk when you go in to give your boss a piece of your mind. Well, maybe so, because that's who you are.
That's right.
I always think of this example. You can control your speech if you want to, because you talk about the sailor that cusses his brains out, but when he's around mom, all of a sudden everything's cleaned up.
He can do it.
How is that done? Because he makes the decision. I ain't going to cuss around mom because she'll knock my head off. So you can do it. You just have to be aware and you have to make up your mind. Respect other people like you'd respect your mom, and then you don't cuss at them.
Right. That's such a good point. You think about being at home with your family. So you got your wife and your kids, and you're yelling at everybody because, you're in charge and you're mad. And so you tell the boys, you do that one more time, I will kill you. And, you're yelling at your wife, get back over there. And the phone rings.
Yes.
And what do you do? What does that tough guy do?
Hello?
Hello, Simmons residence. It's like, how did you do that? And especially the bigger question is, how did you do that quickly for a stranger?
Yeah.
You're yelling at your family. Some stranger calls and wants to sell you a who knows what, and you're a gentleman. Why? You just indicted yourself. You can control it. You're a fool.
Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so you're showing what's in your heart.
You certainly are. And so we want to do that with wisdom. We want to be careful. Take a deep breath. Think it through. Who's in the room? How does this impact other people around me? We can all do it. We used to gossip about people at work, and we had all these shelves that kind of just lined up all the way down through the long hallway in the warehouse we were in. And someone would say, hey, did you hear about and then you could see them kind of look down through the shelf to make sure there was no one on the other side of the shelf. Make sure there's no one in the area, and then say, did you hear what so-and-so did? It's like you just held back for a moment until you knew the coast was clear, at least in your mind, and then you spoke evil of someone. Even the fact that you have to look around is evidence that you shouldn't say what you're about to say.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you have to be sly about it, it just better not be said.
Keep it to yourself. It's not good. It's not helpful. That's gossip. That's slander. It's everything else under the sun that's hurtful to other people. And so after verse 6, being set on fire by hell, he says in verse 7, every kind of beast and bird or reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. So now he switches back to the application of we have tamed every kind of animal. And we really have.
Yeah, dangerous animals too.
In the sea and
Powerful
on land.
animals, yeah.
The lion tamer.
I was just thinking of that today.
He can go into a cage with a lion that is created to devour him and fully control that animal and then come out of the cage and not be able to control his own tongue. Again, almost everything we do shows that I can do it in other situations. We tame Shamu, the killer whale. We can blow whistles and make noises and make that thing jump up out of the water and do tricks for the audience. And the same guy who blows the whistle and controls the whale goes home and cusses at his wife.
Yeah. Yep. Like James says, these things ought not so to be. But, someone will look at that. No man can tame the tongue. Well, then what's the point of all of this? Well, I think James is using hyperbole here.
Right.
Because you look at Psalm 39, for example, in verse 1, David says, I said, In other words, here's a decision that he's made. I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So it can be done, but just like controlling that lion or a cage full of tigers, it takes a lot of practice. You've got to get used. You need to set and train your mind into, this is how I'm going to use my tongue. So, but one thing that helps with that is what James is telling us here, reminding us it's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. That word deadly is kind of unique in the New Testament. It means death-bearing.
Right.
Which is what poison is. It bears death. It brings death to the person that is exposed to it. And that's what the unrestrained tongue is. It is a death-bearing poison. You're going to kill somebody's spirit. In fact, there are cases where people have been killed by a word because they've become so hurt, so depressed that they'll go commit suicide. And what motivated them to do that? The words that they heard that were directed their way.
Yeah.
The constant bullying at school, for example, that drives a child to suicide.
Social media posts.
Yeah, just all of this utter embarrassment and humiliation that they decide, I can't overcome this. And so their life ends. They were killed by a word.
Literally. Yeah.
That's what started the whole thing. It started that fire. So the words that come out of our mouths are so important. They can be so dangerous.
Yeah. And so with all these challenges, we've talked about really so many different types of people who can't control their tongue and yet they can do other things. Towards the end of our reading, James now you can kind of watch him turn back to his brethren. And he says in verse 9, with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. We use it to bless God. Imagine a congregation gathered at services and we're singing praises to God and we're saying amen together with one heart, one accord. And we go out to the car to head home and we say, did you see what Kurt was wearing? God, that guy is an idiot. The same tongue? Really? The shirt you have on now is good. It was the one on Sunday that drove me crazy.
Oh, okay.
The point is that, what was my point? The point is that God had said in the beginning, and we know this, Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, let us make man in our image.
Yep.
You're an image bearer of a holy and righteous God. And I've used the tongue that God's given me, first of all, in James' example, to bless God. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Then to curse that which God has made. And those two things, they can't stay together. One's going to override the other one.
Yeah. They're mutually contradictory, and one will destroy the other, and it's usually the cursing of the men that's going to destroy the blessing of God, because God's going to look at that and say, well, I'm not accepting the blessing because you're turning around and cursing my image bearer. What's all that about? And James, he's so succinct here. He just puts it right into terms that we can clearly picture.
Mm-hmm.
With that point right there, and he'll use some illustrations. John talks about it a little bit too. If you say you love God but hate your brethren, then how can the love of God be in you? He says you're a liar. You cannot hate a brother and love God.
Nope. Because
your brother is a child of God like you are. So how can you love God and hate his child? God's not going to accept that.
That's right.
It's hypocritical. And we are not to be hypocrites. Jesus condemned hypocrisy thoroughly during his earthly ministry. That seems to have disappointed him and infuriated him more than anything else is the hypocrisy. How many times did he call the Pharisees and the scribes, you hypocrites?
That's right.
He condemned that because God is not going to tolerate it.
Nope. He can see through your mask.
Yes.
James 1 and verse 8, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. That's the double-mindedness.
Yeah.
To bless God and curse his children is double-minded. And so you're unstable in all of your ways. You yourself are tearing down what should have been established in your praise of God, which initially that was a good thing. And so he says they can't be so. And so to point out you can't bless God and curse brethren, he uses an illustration that you used earlier to conclude this set of verses. He says, does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. If a spring is bringing out bitter water, no one stays there to wait until there's going to be fresh water.
Yeah.
It's bitter.
You know, that reminds me of several years ago when I was in Russia. We were out in the countryside and came across this spring. I mean, this water, there was this rock face and it was just shelves of shale. And this water's pouring out of there. And so I grabbed a bottle and filled it up and took a swig. And I wasn't expecting anything but nice, fresh, sweet water, and that's what it was.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you're expecting to say, no, it was something like salt water or
I
whatever.
was going to say Chernobyl dump was next door to you or something.
No, but it met the expectation. When you see that spring coming out of the ground like that, pouring out of those rocks, it's cold, it's been filtered by the ground and everything.
God does that.
Man, it was good.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been absolutely shocking to fill up a bottle and take a swig of that and, wow, this bottle's too hot to drink.
Yeah.
And it tastes horrible. It's like, it's salt water. What's going on here? You don't expect that, and it shouldn't be that way. If I'm a Christian, you know, I claim to be a Christian, then the spring that issues forth from me ought to be pure and sweet. It ought to be refreshing like that spring was. And it just doesn't fit nature, is what James is saying here, to have a spring that's... Now, you can have a bitter spring. You can have a spring that'll give bad water. But you're not going to have a spring, James says here, that's going to give you both.
Nope.
It's either good or bad.
Right.
You cannot mix it. And that's his point here. Your words are either going to be good or bad. It's not going to work. It goes against creation to be a mixed up spring where your words are both bad and good. You've got sour language and sweet. That doesn't fit.
Nope.
It's not going to work.
And it won't last.
No.
Jesus makes the same point that a good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. And you can't change that. Think about the Word of God and the power of the Word of God. This is written by James, the brother of Jesus. He says, can a fig tree bear olives? The answer is no. And the answer is no today. That's amazing because we got all kinds of cross-pollination stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And we still can't walk up to a fig tree and go, hey, there's olives on this. If there's olives on that tree, it ain't a fig tree. It's an olive tree, right?
Yep.
It's just the way it is. And we, as hard as we're trying with all the science we got, we still can't change that. And there's principles God's laid out to say, look, for us today, it is still true. Do not deceive yourself about your tongue and say, I'm a real scumbag when I'm with my friends on the weekends, but I can sure clean it up for grandma. No, you're a scumbag.
Yeah.
Period.
It's there. Yeah.
You're just
all
hiding
you've done
something.
is you're hiding it, right? It's not that all of a sudden you've reformed because that evening when you go out with your buddies again, it's back to the old way. So, yes, it's putting a mask on. You're being a hypocrite.
And the fires of hell once again spew forth from your frame, which was made in the image and likeness of God. It should not be. So, you know, it's shows like this, it's lessons like this that we know the answer, but we're going to be challenged today, Kurt. Something's going to come up.
Yeah, we have to remember who we are. You think, before we say something, am I going to be a good spring or a bad one? Am I going to bear the fruit that I should? If I'm a olive tree, I need to be bearing olives. You know, if I'm a Christian, I need to be bearing Christ. I need to be showing Christ to others, and one way to show them is in what I say. what
Well
they hear
said.
coming from me.
Well said. We gotta stay on top of this for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and it takes being reminded, just like James is doing for us here, because it's so easy to slip into the ways of the world and lose control of our tongue.
It is. We've got to be vigilant. I got a couple of questions for you.
Uh-oh. Is it going to be a good use of the tongue here?
For me, yeah.
Oh, good.
We're gonna find out for you.
We'll find out, yeah.
Whole world's watching. Here we go. Question number 1. We know God's word and what it says, so let's do trivia. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus had 2 sisters. What were their names?
They were Martha and Mary.
Yes, very good. Lazarus, Mary, and Martha are brothers and sisters. John chapter 11, verses 1 through 2 gives us in so many words that they're brothers and sisters. So,
Yeah.
Very good.
And they were there when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead.
That's right.
Very touching moment.
That's right. John 11.
Okay, here's my first one for you. What area of Egypt did the Pharaoh give to Jacob and his family when they came down?
They asked for and received the land of Goshen.
Yep, which was apparently one of the most luscious places in Egypt. It was good land there, and Pharaoh said, "Yeah, you go up there."
You know what?
Very generous. of
So
him.
what's the verse for that?
That is Genesis 47.
Okay,
verses
so
1 through 6.
You and I, that's what I love about trivia is with the whole Bible. I think we just fast forwarded backwards like 2,000 years from one question to the next, back to Joseph and Jacob, Pharaoh and Egypt. You got to be ready. I mean, we got to stretch for this stuff. You know, you got to do some spiritual stretching because we jumped all the way
Well, that's
across the
good.
pages of the Bible. It is
Yeah.
good. I love it when that happens. So let's go from Jacob and Joseph forward a ways. When David went out to meet Goliath, how many stones did he take with him?
5 smooth stones that he picked out of a brook.
There you go. Very good. 1 Samuel 17:40. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine.
Yep. And
Good
he
job.
only needed one.
Yeah, he only used one. 1 Samuel 17:40. All right, we got one more.
Okay, and here it is. We're going back again. What were the names of Joseph's 2 sons?
I know this. Ephraim and Manasseh.
There you go. Genesis 41, verses 50 and 52. These were the 2 children that were born to him in Egypt and became 2 of the leading tribes in northern Israel. Ephraim and Manasseh. In fact, the northern kingdom was often referred to as Ephraim.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
right.
Very important in the history of Israel.
It really is. It really is. So we've done good on our trivia. We certainly hope that you have as well. And for all of you who are listening today, you have done well. I'm assuming if you know how podcasts work, you're not talking back to us while we're going through this. You have sat and listened. And when you turn this off, you know, you're going to bump into somebody. Maybe you'll go into work or start a conversation. It's time right now. It's time right now to think about the tongue, the tremendous power that comes with a tongue, that you can cut someone down so quickly and do so much damage. But by the same token, with the very same tongue, you can lift up and encourage someone who desperately needs to hear a kind word. They're all around us. Let's use our tongues wisely. With it, we bless our God and Father, and with it, we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth produce blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so.